We thought we had found paradise. The small beach town of San Isla, tucked away on Mexico's coast, felt like it had been plucked from a postcard. White sand beaches, turquoise waters, and a vibe that whispered relaxation. The four of us, me, Sarah, Dylan, and Jess, had been looking forward to this trip for months. After years of grinding at our jobs, we deserved a week away from reality. The Airbnb was perfect too, a small villa with stucco walls, a private pool, and a rooftop deck where we could watch the sun melt into the ocean every night. The host, Manuel, had been friendly, though a little abrupt when he handed over the keys. "Enjoy your stay," he'd said, barely making eye contact before rushing off. That should have been our first clue. The days blurred together in a haze of sunbathing, margaritas, and late-night laughter. It was everything we'd hoped for. But on our fourth night, things took a turn. We had gone to a local bar in town, a tiny spot with plastic chairs and a jukebox playing old ranchera songs. It was well past midnight when we decided to head back to the villa. The streets were deserted, the town eerily quiet. Dylan, who had volunteered to be the designated driver, was navigating the narrow roads when we saw the headlights. A black SUV appeared out of nowhere, pulling up behind us so close it almost tapped our bumper. "What the hell?" Dylan muttered, glancing in the rearview mirror. Before any of us could react, the SUV sped up, cutting us off and forcing us to a stop. 3 men stepped out. They were dressed casually, jeans, t-shirts, but the way they moved was anything but casual. One of them had a gun. "Stay calm," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. The men approached, their faces shadowed by the dim street lights. The one with the gun tapped on Dylan's window with the barrel. "Out," he said in Spanish. His voice was quiet, but it carried a weight that made my stomach drop. Dylan rolled down the window an inch. "We don't want any trouble," he said, his Spanish hesitant. The man smiled, but it wasn't friendly. "Get out," he repeated. Dylan glanced back at us, his face pale. Then he opened the door and stepped out. The man gestured for the rest of us to follow. My heart was pounding as I climbed out of the car. The night air felt suffocating. "Tourists," the man said, looking us over. He seemed to find this amusing. "You picked the wrong town." "Please," Jess said, her voice shaking. "We'll give you whatever you want. Just let us go." The man tilted his head, considering this. Then he motioned for one of his companions, who opened the back of the SUV. Inside were bags, heavy black duffel bags. My stomach turned. I didn't need to look inside to know what they contained. "Drive this to the border," the man said, pointing at Dylan. "No questions." "We can't," Sarah blurted out. "We're on vacation. We don't even know where the border is." The man's smile disappeared. He stepped closer to Sarah, his eyes cold. "You think this is a game?" "Stop," I said, stepping between them. "We'll do it. Just tell us what to do." For a moment, I thought he was going to hit me, but then he laughed. A low, chilling sound. "Smart boy," he said. He gestured to his men, who started loading the bags into our car. "We'll be watching. If you try anything, well, let's just say you won't like what happens." He didn't have to elaborate. We drove to where they told us, left the bag where they wanted, and by some miracle, they let us go back to our Airbnb, but not before putting another black bag in our trunk. They warned us again to not tell anyone what just happened and to stay put for the night. They'll be watching. Dylan drove us back to the villa in silence, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. None of us spoke until we were safely inside, the doors locked and bolted. "What the hell just happened?" Jess said, her voice shaking. "We have to call the police," Sarah said. "And tell them what?" Dylan snapped. "That we've got a car full of drugs? They'll arrest us before they go after those guys." He was right. We were trapped. And the worst part? We didn't even know who we were dealing with. But we'd soon find out. The next morning, the knock came. It was loud, insistent, and it made my stomach twist into knots. Dylan opened the door, and there they were. The same men from the night before, their expressions colder now. "We need your help again," the leader said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. We can't," Sarah stammered. "We're leaving today." The man smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "No, you're not." They didn't want money. They wanted us. Not just to traffic drugs, but to do things I can't even bring myself to write down. They were the owners of the Airbnb, they said. They'd been watching us since we arrived. Every move we made, every laugh, every drink by the pool. They'd seen it all. And now, they owned us. We spent the next 2 days in hell. They made us run errands, deliver packages, meet people in dark alleys. Each time I thought this would be the end, but it never was. They always came back, always wanted more. On the third night, I decided I couldn't do it anymore. "We have to leave," I whispered to Dylan as we sat by the pool, the men watching us from the living room. "How?" he whispered back. "They'll know." "Not if we're smart," I said. We waited until the men fell asleep, or pretended to. Then we made our move. Jess had found a set of spare keys in the kitchen, and we used them to take one of their cars. The drive to the airport was a blur, my heart racing the entire way. I kept expecting to see headlights behind us, to feel the cold barrel of a gun against my head. But we made it. By some miracle, we made it. We didn't tell anyone what happened. Not the police, not our families, no one. We left St. Asla and never looked back. But sometimes, late at night, I'll wake up in a cold sweat, convinced I hear footsteps outside my door. And I wonder if they're still watching, waiting for the day they come to collect what they think we owe. I want to preface this by saying I've stayed in a lot of Airbnbs over the years, and nothing like this has ever happened to me before or since. This happened last summer when my boyfriend, Alex, and I decided to spend a weekend in a small mountain town a few hours away. We'd been stressed with work and thought a getaway would be perfect. Just the two of us in a quiet cabin surrounded by nature. We found the listing online. The pictures showed a charming rustic cabin with wooden beams, a cozy fireplace, and a deck overlooking the woods. It was exactly what we were looking for. The reviews were mostly good, though a few mentioned the host being a little odd. But we figured as long as the place was clean and quiet, we didn't care if the host was quirky. When we arrived, the cabin looked just like the pictures. It was tucked away at the end of a dirt road, with no neighbors in sight. The host, a man named Greg, met us there to hand over the keys. He seemed friendly enough, though there was something off about the way he lingered, watching us as we unpacked the car. Before he left, he gave us a rundown of the house rules. Don't leave food out because of bears. Take your shoes off inside, and most importantly, don't go into the locked room at the end of the hall. Alex and I exchanged a look at that last one. It felt like a strange thing to emphasize, but Greg didn't elaborate. He handed me the keys, told us to call if we needed anything, and drove off. The first night was uneventful. We cooked dinner, drank some wine, and sat on the deck listening to the sounds of the forest. It was peaceful, exactly what we'd hoped for. But the next morning, things started to feel off. While Alex was in the shower, I went to the kitchen to make coffee. As I passed the hallway, I noticed the door to the locked room. I don't know why, but it caught my attention in a way it hadn't the day before. I could have sworn I heard something, a faint shuffling sound like someone moving inside. I froze, listening, but the sound stopped. Telling myself it was just the house settling, I hurried back to the kitchen. When Alex came downstairs, I mentioned the noise, but he shrugged it off. "It's probably just animals in the walls," he said. I wanted to believe him, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. That night, I woke up around 2 a.m. to the sound of creaking floorboards. At first, I thought it was Alex, but when I rolled over, he was still in bed, sound asleep. The sound was faint, but steady, like someone walking through the house. My heart started racing as I listened. It wasn't coming from the living room or the kitchen. It was coming from the hallway. Specifically, from behind the locked door. I shook Alex awake, whispering that I heard something. He groggily got out of bed and grabbed the flashlight from his bag. "It's probably nothing," he said, but his voice wasn't convincing. We crept into the hallway, and the air felt colder somehow. Alex shone the flashlight at the locked door. The shuffling sound had stopped, but now there was something else. A faint scratching, like nails on wood. We both stood there, frozen, unsure of what to do. "Hello?" Alex called out, his voice shaky. The scratching stopped. Without thinking, Alex reached for the doorknob. It didn't budge. It was locked, just like Greg had said. But as he pulled his hand away, we both heard it. A faint whisper from the other side of the door. We couldn't make out the words, but it was unmistakably a voice. We backed away slowly, not daring to turn our backs on the door. Once we were back in the bedroom, we locked the door and shoved a chair under the handle. Neither of us slept that night. The next morning, we decided we'd had enough. We packed our bags and were ready to leave when Greg pulled up in his truck. He looked surprised to see us. "Leaving early?" he asked, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. Alex and I exchanged a glance. "Yeah, something came up," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Greg nodded, but his gaze lingered on us. "Did you go near the locked room?" he asked suddenly. "No," Alex said quickly. "You told us not to." Greg's expression softened slightly, but he still didn't seem convinced. "Good," he said after a pause. "It's better that way." We didn't ask him what he meant. We just got in the car and drove away, the cabin disappearing in the rearview mirror. It wasn't until we were halfway home that Alex admitted he'd heard the whisper too. We never found out what was behind that door, and honestly, I don't want to know. But every now and then, I think about Greg's words. It's better that way. Whatever was in that room, I'm glad we didn't find out. This happened a year ago when my boyfriend Eric and I decided to rent an Airbnb for a quiet weekend getaway. We found a cute little house in a small beach town that promised peace, privacy, and a short walk to the ocean. The pictures looked great. Modern decor, a cozy living room, and a small but functional kitchen. The reviews were glowing, and the host, Mark, had a 5-star rating. When we arrived, everything seemed fine. The house looked just like the photos, clean and welcoming. There was a little welcome basket on the counter with snacks and a note from Mark saying, "Enjoy your stay. Let me know if you need anything." It felt like the perfect escape. The first day was great. We spent most of it exploring the town, grabbing dinner at a local seafood place, and walking along the beach. By the time we got back to the house, it was already dark. We locked the doors, watched a movie, and went to bed, feeling safe and relaxed. That didn't last long. I woke up around 2 a.m. to a strange sound, like soft thudding coming from the living room. At first, I thought it was just the old house settling or the wind outside. But then I heard it again. Footsteps. I nudged Eric awake. "Do you hear that?" I whispered. He groggily sat up, listening. The footsteps were faint but deliberate, moving slowly across the hardwood floor, "Someone's in the house," I said, my voice shaking. Eric motioned for me to stay quiet as he climbed out of bed and grabbed his phone. We didn't have any weapons, so he picked up a heavy lamp from the nightstand and crept toward the bedroom door. I followed a few steps behind, my heart pounding so hard I thought whoever was out there would hear it. When Eric opened the door, the footsteps stopped. The living room was dark, but the faint glow from the streetlight outside cast just enough light to see. At first, there was nothing, just the couch, the coffee table, and the open kitchen beyond. But then we saw it. A man was standing in the corner near the front door. He was facing us, completely still, his face obscured by the shadows. He wasn't holding anything, but the sight of him standing there, silent and unmoving, sent a wave of terror through me. "What the hell are you doing in here?" Eric demanded, raising the lamp like a weapon. The man didn't respond. He just stood there staring at us. "Get out or I'm calling the police," Eric shouted, his voice trembling. Without a word, the man turned and walked toward the kitchen. We heard the back door creak open, and then he was gone. Eric locked the door behind him, and we immediately called the police. They arrived about 20 minutes later and did a sweep of the property. They didn't find anything. No sign of forced entry, no indication of how the man got in. They told us it was probably a homeless person looking for shelter and advised us to keep the doors locked, as if we needed that reminder. We didn't sleep the rest of the night. Every little creak and groan of the house made us jump. The next morning, we decided to cut the trip short. As we were packing up, Eric went to grab his wallet from the kitchen counter and froze. "Did you leave this here?" he asked, holding up a key. It was an old, rusted house key we'd never seen before, sitting right next to the welcome basket. My stomach dropped as I realized what it meant. Whoever had been in the house had a key. They didn't break in. They were supposed to be there. We left immediately and reported it to Airbnb, but they were less than helpful. Mark, the host, claimed he had no idea how someone else could have had a key. He insisted the locks had been changed recently and that no one else had access to the house. We tried to push the issue, but without concrete evidence, there wasn't much we could do. To this day, I don't know who that man was or why he was there. The thought of him standing silently in the dark corner of the living room still haunts me. I haven't stayed in an Airbnb since, and I don't think I ever will.